All right, the Mental Health Recovery Services Board meeting is now called to order, and we'll have our roll call.
Ms. Friedman, Mr. Arnold,
Here.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Carter, Ms. Clark,
Here.
Reverend Gordon,
Here.
Ms. Harding, Ms. Mendoza-Locke,
Here.
Mr. Knowles,
Here.
Mr. O'Connor,
Here.
Ms. Rodriguez,
Here.
Dr. Russell,
Here.
Mr. Stengel, Major White,
Here.
Ms. White.
Katina. Katina? Sorry, Katina.
Thank you. Ms. Harding,
Here.
All right, thank you very much. Now we'll have the recognition of our visitors. Richard?
Robert Kasperzak, board staff.
Dave Gallagher, board staff.
Bettina Langston, board staff.
Steve Spinelli, board staff.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is the termination of the items to be removed from the consent agenda, and they will include item 5 and all of 6, and I'll read them. The meeting minutes, the treasurer's report, the 120-day appeal recommendations, Unison Health fiscal year 23 budget revision request, the Unison Health Whitney Manor Ohio Miles Community Capital Project approval, and the health officer designation, the AUD fiscal year 23 no-cost extension. Should any of these items be removed from the consent agenda?
Just a question, so the Zeph Center 120 days still,
That's what we're going to hear next.
Okay.
It's a new item on the agenda. It wasn't presented at Planning and Oversight.
And the absence of the circle next to F is not relevant?
It was inconsequential to
It's
my
inconsequential
development
to
of
me
this
then.
agenda.
All right, can we have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
so moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Clark,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke,
Yes.
Mr. Knowles,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Dr. Russell,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
All right, now next, the 120-day appeal recommendation for the Zeph Center, and Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm on page 13 in the board packet. As you remember at the February board meeting, the trustees approved issuing Zeph Center 120-day notice regarding its intent, the board's intent to make substantial changes to the provider agreement, which includes adding value-based purchasing language for crisis services, along with the board's intent to not renew the Ohio Moss funded programming, which is the suicide prevention campaign, as well as gambling services. So on March 22nd, the Zeph Center submitted an appeal letter indicating the acceptance of the notice regarding the Ohio Moss funded programs, but appealing the 120-day notice regarding the substantial changes to the provider agreement, specifically regarding adding value-based purchasing language for crisis services. So as a result of the appeal letter, board staff and Zeph Center staff have met twice to negotiate a resolution. And ultimately, both parties agreed to begin value-based purchasing in fiscal year 24 through a separate contract, through a separate memorandum of agreement. So together, we will work to finalize the metrics for the provider agreement as well as any enhanced performance metrics that will be included in the value-based purchasing contract. And in addition to that, it will include a pay-for-reporting component to support ZEF's development of a process to collect the board-identified metrics that are not currently included in our EHR, which is consistent with the presentation that TBD staff provided to us back in February, I believe it was. So payment arrangements still have to be worked out, but they will not exceed the proposed amount of $331,500. Our current provider agreement indicates that the board trustees have until April 30th to decide ZEF's appeal. So we come with recommendations today to do a separate contract through the MOA and then work through the performance metrics. Should you decide against those recommendations, then ZEF Center has the option to accept that decision or request a board-to-board meeting. Should that happen, it has to happen by the end of the month though, or they can also seek mediation through Ohio Mass. So on page 14 in the board packet, there is a motion that indicates the board's agreement to rescind the decision made to add crisis services to the value-based purchasing language, and instead to add, for us to create, to execute an MOA to not exceed the $331,500 for the value-based contracting related to crisis services. So that motion is on page 14, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let's get the motions on the table first.
All right. Who will,
I'll motion.
thank you.
Second, Eric White.
All right. Moved in second. And now, any questions? No questions?
I
Comments?
see a lot of faces like, what did that mean?
I guess I wonder, what exactly is the difference? I mean, if you're still going to do a memorandum of, you're going to essentially work that, is it, they're just not comfortable with what it's in there currently, and so you guys want to work together to negotiate exactly what that's going to sound like?
We will, yes, and also one of the points that they had brought up was when you think about the annual performance report, actually twice annually you get the performance report. So there will still be ZEF Center Crisis Services in there, but the value-based purchasing would just be a separate report from that. So we will still collect crisis metrics as we currently are doing. We'll still measure them, we'll still report on them, but the value-based portion of that will just be separate reporting that's done.
And I think also our agreement when we moved services over there would be that we would continuously fund base level services, right?
Right. This is,
And
yes,
the
that makes
performance
sense.
metrics
Okay.
built within the grander contract and reported similar to
Yes.
what the base level
Yeah.
performance measures might be, might lend an air to this board that
Sure.
maybe they're not performing as well as we would like them, which would be a false
Sure.
impression. So to alleviate that false impression, they wanted to have a base contract with base metrics and then a separate MOA or MOU, whatever we're calling it, with the enhanced metrics.
That makes sense.
We find that entirely acceptable, logical, and still keeps us moving forward on our pathway to create value-based purchasing for crisis services. And so it seemed like a very reasonable request and a very reasonable resolution to a fairly complicated
Sure.
discussion.
That clarifies it. Thank you very much.
So will the separate metrics for the $331,000 be a subset of some of the tasks, or will they apply to the whole range of crisis services?
So we've identified some of the metrics already. So what we envision is like a broad, and help me with this, by the way, a broad Excel spreadsheet. We'll have all the metrics, including those that are regularly collected and those that are being added just for value-based purchasing. Some of those metrics will be in the base and in the enhanced. We'll have base level numbers that'll be negotiated for those that are relevant for the base contract. Then we'll have enhanced level metrics for just the value-based purchasing. Those will appear in the MOA. And for those that they cannot currently collect because their EHR or their business model, their business reporting structures aren't developed yet, we will then pay for reporting for those so that they can initiate those business methods to collect that data, which is very consistent with the way we started this conversation to begin with. So, and I'm talking about last October, when we started this. If you recall, the original conversation was to create a time period for pay for reporting before we had a pay for performance. So this is kind of a little bit of a hybrid, and it makes, in my opinion, it's a very elegant solution, in my opinion.
Is this the first time we've ever done it?
First time we've ever done it. So we're learning, they're learning, and one of the things we learned is that when we brought this to you in contract language the last time, I think we needed to do that, but we also needed to be prepared to meet with Zeph and talk about what could actually be done, and that was the part that was missing in that. So we own that piece of it, is we never really went back to them and said, hey, this is what we wanted to do, this is what we're thinking. Instead, what we did is we just put it out here in a board meeting, and we didn't think about what their reaction would be at the time. And so we just needed to go back and work that out. And we'll continue to work it out because we need to have this in place for the end of June, and it will be.
It'll be for 1 year.
It'll be for 1 year, right. But the idea is that this will continue. So whatever the pay for reporting metric or expenses are, that will get rolled over into the pay for performance metrics the following year.
It almost sounds like a pilot program.
It very much so is.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
And procedurally, I don't know if that's right, even the right word, the reason we're doing the MOA is so that we're having the contract signed by April 30th?
So the reason we want to rescind the language of the contract that adds value-based purchasing into that contract is so that there isn't any confusion between what is the base level reporting requirements and the metrics that we say, essentially that here's the money we're giving you and these are the metrics that tell us you're doing okay. And then there's a separate MOA for enhanced metrics that say, hey, you're doing really great. Thank you. Here's the extra money for that.
So why do we only have it until April 30th?
Because that's Ohio statute that says once an agency appeals, we have 60 days to make a decision.
Okay, there you go.
And if we don't make that, basically we have to make the decision within 60 days. And this is our last meeting before April 30th. So because there's a lot of new board members as well, we wanted to kind of put that extra, we wanted to put that language in there so you understood the actual process. So if there was anything you wanted to change in this, or if there was anything that you said no, you understand that we're not done as of today, if that occurs.
So the next go-round, there won't be a need for an MOA. We'll be in a position to create a contract.
While we haven't had that conversation, my sense is that their concern and our concern, or their concern and our agreement would be is that the MOA would stay in place for the enhanced metrics, and the base contract would report their base reporting requirements and their base metrics. So I don't see any issue with having two contracts for this.
As long as some of our standard concepts and provisions make their way appropriately to the MOA, I'm not troubled by that, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so let me speak to that a little bit. So I think here's what I'm hearing when you say that, is the requirements and the obligations of both the board and ZEF Center are defined within our provider agreement. The base level performance metrics, things that we say, hey, like numbers of outputs and then outcomes related to that tell us, hey, you're doing what we expect for the $5.7 million. That language will be in the provider agreement, and is in the provider agreement, and will remain in the provider agreement. The MOA will only speak to the enhanced metrics for those value-based purchasing. All the rules and regulations about how services are performed and all that are built within the provider agreement, and the MOA won't ever change that. It'll just say your performance exceeded the base to the level where we are willing to pay you a performance, a value added for performance. And then the following year, or then that current year will also say, and we're willing to pay you this amount for you to create your business structures for reporting for those that you aren't currently. And then I would imagine that all that money in the following year, with the $331,500, will just be strictly paid for performance in the MOA the following year. But clinically, business-wise, structurally, the provider agreement is the main agreement.
Okay. So the MOA references the provider agreement as...
We haven't developed the MOA yet.
All right.
But I think what we're trying to do is when Phil presents his 6-month report for performance and his annual report, you'll see base level performance metrics.
Okay.
In a different time frame, you'll see performance metrics, value-based performance metrics. In a different time, in a different report.
Okay. All right.
And we have a couple of representatives from ZEF Center here. You want to introduce?
Sure. Jennifer Jansen is the Chief Clinical Officer, and Courtney Burrows is the Senior Director of Client Services.
So if there's anything, if it's okay with you, if there's
Of course it
anything.
is.
Sorry, sometimes I get ahead of myself.
We intend to continue to work collaboratively with the board. It was just this request to have the value-based metrics separated out from our base contract. And we were open to that, and we're excited to move forward. The data piece has been very exciting, but as Scott mentioned, there are a lot of work that goes into building the tracking mechanisms and ensuring staff are inputting things correctly so that we get good data out on the other end. And that is a process. And so some of the things we'd like to know and be able to report out on are not finished being developed.
Any further discussion? All right, let's call for the roll call vote.
Mr. Arnold?
Aye.
Ms. Banks?
Yes.
Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Reverend Gordon?
Yes.
Ms. Harding?
Yes.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke?
Yes.
Mr. Knowles?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Dr. Russell?
Abstain.
Major White?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Okay, it passes, thank you. All right, we're going to now go into open session. And Richard?
There's a lot going on at Gilbert Christie. The only thing I wanted to report on Thursday, there will be another meeting of the Charter Review Committee. They have not met since January the 19th. At that meeting, they had a spirited discussion that they think that City Council should be reduced from 12 members to 9 members. They didn't set another meeting. They decided to have a subcommittee look into it, and that's what they've been doing. They don't have an agenda, so I'm going to be there on Thursday and try and find out what they're up to. I hope they decide against it because it's just going to lead to more discord and fighting among city council members, and they've got enough going on as it is. That'll be on Thursday. I wanted to talk just briefly, and as I read more and more about these shootings, I go back into my files and I try to find old articles that have some relevance. The one in Louisville brought back a lot of memories. It brought back one of the strangest mass shootings I've ever seen. It was September the 14th of 1989. A man named Joseph Westbecker, who had been hospitalized 3 times, didn't do any good, 3 times. He walked into a place where he used to work and he shot 19 people, 7 fatally, 12 injuries. The thing about this that was different from every other shooting that I've ever, he used armor-piercing bullets. Now, I don't know anything about ammunition, but I know that with most bullets, there's an entry wound or an exit wound. No, with armor-piercing bullets, it blows a limb completely off. This is how bad it was. For the survivors, the doctors had to go on television and ask any doctors and nurses that had served in the Vietnam War, will you come in and help us, because this was 89. First Gulf War wasn't until 91. The last war had been the Vietnam War, because they had never seen people shot like this, only doctors and nurses that treat people wounded in combat. Now, that was one of many articles that was in this New York Times article. This is 20 years ago. This is back before mental illness got dragged into this and politicized. It's all about shootings between the years of 1949 and 1999. Those are the years that we had large numbers of people in Ohio and across the country in state hospitals. By 2000, most of the hospitals had been downsized. 100 of them, I went through and counted them. I counted 31 of them where the number of people shot was in the double digits. But remember, back then they had to rely on pistols. Nobody gave a hands on an assault rifle back then, very few. And so, in my humble opinion, back then the news media did a really lousy job of reporting on these shootings. They just didn't consider it important. An example of what I'm talking about, the Joseph Westbecker shooting in Louisville, it happened the same time that Zsa Zsa Gabor was on trial. If anybody doesn't remember this sordid spectacle, Zsa Zsa Gabor was stopped in Beverly Hills by a cop. The trial lasted 13 days. Every day there was more than 100 reporters there. They reported on what dress she wore, what jewelry she wore, what she had. The country was consumed by it. And so that shooting, like so many other, they report a couple of days, and then they forget all about it. Today it's a little different. This is what we're looking at today. This is from the Trump years, September. This is after the Parkland, Florida shooting. It's Trump posing with some of the survivors and praying in the Oval Office. The guy's good at photo ops, I'll give him that. And this was from the Wall Street Journal. Just a month before the pandemic, Trump takes a stand for the mentally ill. What it's talking about is he wanted to introduce legislation that would bring back Medicaid payments for institutions that had more than 16 beds. That's how we downsized the hospital. Couldn't get anybody to pay for it. And he did have bipartisan support. Then the pandemic hit, and it was all sort of put on the back burner. But this is yesterday's USA Today. At the NRA convention, there's candidate Trump once again. He's saying this is not a gun issue, this is a mental health issue. There can't be any denial. Mental illness is the best counter argument to gun control. And he's saying we got to have institutions. Pence was at the same convention a few days earlier. He talked the same thing. He loves reminding people that when he was governor of Indiana years ago, they created the first psychiatric hospital in 50 years. It was 159 beds. That's what people are saying. There is a nostalgic belief out there that back when we put people in psychiatric hospitals, we didn't have mass shootings. We all lived in harmony. It ain't true, but that's what certain politicians and certain people in the media are saying. I would like this board to consider a position paper on public safety. You've got a levy coming up next year, a 0.5. It would probably be a good idea to ask for new money. There's certainly a need for it. But this argument about, what should we do with the mentally ill? Can we lock them up and solve this stupid problem? It's still going to continue next year. You're going to hear the media and politicians just beating this to death. I would like to see a position paper that examines reality versus nostalgic memories. You know, people think that back then, we did have mass shootings, but back then, you had to rely on a handgun. Today, anybody can get their hands on these AR-15 state-of-the-art killing machines with giant magazines so they can kill more people. The news media pays attention today, but they didn't 30 years ago. And this has been an epidemic for decades. Some people think it's new. It's not. We've always had these terrible mass shootings, even when we put large numbers of people in psychiatric hospitals. So next year, we're going to go before the voters. I think that a position paper would be very helpful when you're dealing with editorial staff at the Blade and City Levy Review Committee and whoever else you have to go before. I think it would be a good idea to start on that, because this argument about what do we do with these crazy people, what do we do with them, it'll continue next year. And I think it is a matter of record. You know, I have plenty of stuff in my files, you know, stuff like in 2012, James Holmes walked into a theater in Colorado and shot 82 people. It came out at his trial. He was on the phone in the parking lot trying to get to a crisis line. He got through and it was disconnected after 9 seconds. He told the court-appointed psychiatrist, if I talked to a mental health professional, I would not have walked into the theater and shot 82 people. I've got plenty of articles like that in my house. It is a matter of record that community services can prevent violence. But it's never been proven, in my opinion, that locking people up in psychiatric institutions like Joseph Westbecker 3 times didn't do any good. It's never been proven that's effective. So I'd like to see this board consider a position paper on public safety that examines the reality versus that nostalgic belief that years ago we didn't have these mass shootings and all lived in harmony. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Richard always presents such interesting comments. I look forward to it. Are there any other comments? All right. I want to say that I just learned today that this is the first time in 2 years that Senna has missed a meeting. But she's in New York doing something extremely important. So when she comes back, tell her how proud you are of her. She is phenomenal. This time we're going to dismiss the meeting and entertain a motion that we go into executive session.
And the motion is executive session for impending legal matters, just so we're clear.
Moved
Mr.
and sec-
Arnold?
Yes.
Ms. Banks? Yes. Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Reverend Gordon?
Yes.
Ms. Harding?
Yes.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke?
Yes.
Mr. Knowles?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Dr. Russell?
Yes.
Major White?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Okay, want you to know that Ms. Carwall, our legal representative for the opioid litigation, is here as well. We want to make sure we get that on the record so we can go into executive session. We're in executive session. Once we come out, we will likely have a motion for settlement discussions. And so if we can kill the camera and the mic and everybody exit the room, that'd be great.
Yes, I got a lot of.
Okay, that's
We
not,
will
that wasn't
receive-
a class action.
Correct.
Okay, makes
Motion
sense.
to come out of
We
executive
will
session.
receive, I can use this now.
One's a university meeting and then the other one's a.
Okay, we will receive a motion that we come out of executive
So
session.
moved.
Second.
Properly moved and second that we come out of executive session. Any questions? Comments? All those in favor, I think we do this
You
by
do this by voice.
acclamation.
Yep.
Voice
Aye.
vote. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Those abstain. And we're out of executive session. Our next task then is to accept the motion.
Because it wasn't broadcast, we should read it into the meeting minutes, so if you'll indulge me,
Yes, sir.
I'll take that task. Now therefore be it resolved by the Mental Health Recovery Services Board of Lucas County, Ohio, Section 1, the Mental Health Recovery Services Board of Lucas County hereby accepts the proposed settlements for the following entities pursuant to the terms of the One Ohio MOU: Allergan, CVS, New Hansen, Teva, Walgreens, Walmart. Section 2, that the Executive Director of the MHRSB is hereby authorized to accept the proposed settlements pursuant to the terms of the One Ohio MOU on behalf of the MHRSB. Section 3, that the retained special counsel Zolan Krantz LLC is hereby authorized to accept the proposed settlements pursuant to the terms of the One Ohio MOU on behalf of the MHRSB of Lucas County via electronic or physical signature. Section 4, that it is found and determined that all formal actions of the board relating to the adoption of this resolution were adopted in an open meeting of this board, and that all deliberations of this board and any of its committees that resulted in such formal actions were in meetings open to the public in compliance with all legal requirements. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved in second. Question?
I do have a question. In section 3, do we need of Lucas County following MHRSB?
So on behalf of the MHRSB of Lucas County,
Right, do we need of Lucas County, because that's really part of MHRSB?
It's there.
it's,
Section 2, I think.
So I'm saying, is it necessary, is it redundant?
it technically is redundant,
Okay,
So-
all right.
but I don't want to reprint.
Yeah, no, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine.
Okay. Now, forgive me, because I am going to call the roll, and I have, in my 12 years history, have never done this.
It's about time.
So, well, I'm just gonna go by your name tags, that's easy. David Knowles,
Yes.
Lisa Banks,
Yes.
Erica White,
Yes.
Felicia Clark,
Yes.
Christina Rodriguez,
Yes.
Nima Bell,
Yes.
Andrea Mendoza-Locke,
Yes.
Danetta Carter,
Yes.
Brian O'Connor, David Arnold,
Yes.
Katina Harding,
Yes.
Calvin Brown,
Yes.
Charles Russell,
Yes.
Major Tricia White. Motion carries.
Otis Gordon?
Great
You don't
job.
vote, you're the chair.
Oh, I don't vote?
No.
Oh, that's
But if you want to vote, Otis Gordon.
all right, meeting adjourned?
Let's say motion passed.
Motion passed
Great.
and meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Good job, everybody.
Good job.
Good job.